All right, all of you freedom-loving boys and girls, welcome to Mission Critical Podcast. If you are watching or listening to this podcast, you are part of the resistance. Hell, you're not part of the resistance. You might be the only resistance in your community. So God bless everybody for taking the time out to watch and listen to us two knuckleheads. We're your hosts. I'm Mark, and for the first time ever in studio,
I don't have you guys. I lost you guys somehow.
What happened?
It's just working.
Unbelievable.
Oh, and we're already having our first technical difficulty with Blackbeard, who's making a really good face, but we can still see you, sir.
Yep.
I don't know if you can see and hear us. He is frozen. No, we can hear you.
Yep. Yeah, we can hear you. Boy, that NSA guy.
Boy, that NSA guy does not
He's
like
making
us.
us money tonight.
He is really pissing us off. I mean, Eric Blackbeard, you're back. Can you hear us? No, he probably can't hear us. So, all right. So, hey, for the first time ever, so we record these things and then we upload them and then we post them, but we might end up actually stopping this recording and starting over as we wait for our guest to take care of some technical difficulties.
Yep.
But before we introduce our guests, as we always do, here's what tonight's episode is going to be about. And you can already see it's going to be about a bunch of tomfoolery. God almighty, we're going to have to really work hard to keep this one under control. But we're going to talk about, we were kind of coming up with the title. We're going to talk about Easter eggs, so take the entertainment industry, and we're going to talk about some very specific things. But in entertainment, you find Easter eggs. And we're not necessarily talking about an Easter egg for what episode 2 or part 2
or
of the
even
movie.
Intermediate Easter eggs.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that.
We're talking about real life Easter eggs. Easter eggs that may or may not have been planted in your form of community, your form of entertainment, whether it's a video game. We got Blackbeard back, but on a completely another feed.
He's multiplied.
You just multiplied. There is a duplicity of effort here, but you are back, sir. But so Steven's been on before. We'll let him introduce himself in a second. But as we were just saying, so it's Easter eggs, but not Easter eggs having to do with what's the next episode of what's the next in the Marvel movies.
Right.
We don't mean those type of Easter eggs. We mean seriously, are there hidden gems of truth, wisdom, knowledge pertaining to a wide variety of subjects in our entertainment and
or even fun hidden conspiracies.
Well, and see, and I'm just gonna we'll bring it over to Steve in a second. See, Redbeard's already pulling at my tugging at my strings because I actually disagree with these guys to some extent, but I also agree with them to some extent.
I forgot my tinfoil hat.
You did.
I forgot it.
See, again,
dang it.
Everybody, this is going to be a hard one to control. Let's actually go ahead and let Steven say hello and tell everybody a little bit about yourself, sir, now that you're back.
Well,
now that you're back with that kick-ass backdrop to upstage everybody in the world.
Yeah.
I know that it appears like I'm in like a Panamanian jungle or something, but it is just a backdrop, unfortunately. Well, thanks. It's I'm just like I said, I think in the first episode we did a bit of an autodidact in the sense that I find these subjects to be very interesting and I've looked at them for a number of years, and that doesn't mean that I'm right about them, but I think I've got a good understanding of a decent amount of these things, and I think that once we start to get into it a bit, you'll kind of some light bulbs might kind of go off a little bit. And I love pushback because I don't know everything, and I'm sure there are things that I'm missing. It's almost, there's no question. So, but yeah.
Well, so again, by way of just, your introduction, kind of coming into the subject, that, or the topic at hand, I'm going to turn it over to Redbeard here to do the intro, to really kind of flesh it out, because this was actually a conversation that these two knuckleheads had with each other. And then I kind of got drug into at the end. And like I said, I'm kind of, and to Stephen's point, I'm a little bit, maybe blah, blah, blah. But where these guys are going, I'm like, the more they keep talking, I'm like, to Blackbeard's point, I'm like, oh, actually, that kind of makes a little bit more sense. I can kind of see that correlation with other things, da, da, da. So on that note, And also to Blackbird's comment, and we say this all the time, leave a comment, make a suggestion. You know, if you think we're all full of shit on what we're about to say, because there's a good probability that's true, let us know. Without further ado, let's bring it over to Blackbeard, or correction, Redbeard. Oh, there's too many beers. Oh no.
Yeah, he's got a better beard than me.
Oh, come on.
My black beard is short.
But it's a refined look.
But yours is more piratey. You know, I'd actually fear and respect your beard more than his, to tell the truth.
It's just because
he looks
like I'm in the
sinister.
Caribbean. You know?
100%. I guarantee you, he has probably a much larger library of burnt DVDs and CDs from back in the day than I do.
I'm not even sure what that means. So without further ado, let's actually get on track. And let's go ahead. Tell everybody what we're talking about and why we're talking about it.
Basically, the premise for tonight spawned off of, like Mark said, it was a conversation that me and Steven had. And we just kind of started going down this thing of growing up and playing through different video games. There's little things that like I started to pick up on and Steven started to pick up on, you know, the more games that we played. And it seemed like there's a lot of parallels or similarities to things that were taking place, you know, in real life.
But you're specifically talking about video games,
right?
Okay.
And video games in particular. And I feel like the reason for that is because, you know, and Mark and I briefly talked about this too, you know, it doesn't mean that it did occur or has occurred, but video games, as opposed to movies and several other things, are one of those avenues of, if you wanted to get information out there, regardless of what it is, you have a greater potential to do it through anonymity because you could use pseudonyms and it's a video game, right? Like there's a lot of different things that you can do as a development member. I feel to where you could implement shared experiences or something that you think is intriguing, but might be maybe too much to digest immediately. So it's a quirky thing you could put in a game or some type of media. That's not to say that there also isn't some real life things that are suggested through video games or, you know, just something conspiratorial, if you will. So it's a very wide lens in which information could be disseminated through. And I would also like to tell people, like, look, there's no absolutes in this conversation. I would be very remiss to say that of all the conversations, this is absolutely what it is, which makes it fun. So
yeah, and just on that note, before we come over to Blackbeard, I'll just three kind of points of order here. First, look, with everything that's going on in the world, and just like there's just enough madness going on, so we're trying to have a little bit more fun. You know, we just did the guns and things. We're doing this one. We're going to do guns and things again, because there's just so much serious crap going on. It's time to take a step back and have a little bit of fun. So that's just the caveat. You can already see it's already tomfoolery and shenanigans, you know, here at the studio. But going over to Blackbeard for your response to, you know, Redbeard's intro. But so when he was first telling me about that conversation you guys had, I naturally, you know, I've got that, you know, CIA intelligence officer, you know, skepticism. I'm like, well, okay, look, really, you know, would you really use that medium to try to, like, you know, get some information out to awaken or inform the public of something that is taking place? My knee-jerk reaction to that was no.
Right.
But then I started thinking about it and I'm like, but hang on, but you know, a lot of these games hire consultants, you know, people who come in with that background to consult them on, well, and look, and where I'm actually more on in agreement with these guys is you look at movies, and we'll get to movies here in down the road a little bit, whether it's TV shows, you know, streaming service type of shows or movies. There are people with those backgrounds coming on as consultants, and are they possibly doing something or like, oh, this is what we would do? But what they're really trying to do is, like, as you said, finding that cutout, that little bit of anonymity to be like, well, now I just got you guys to do this in a movie, you know, and now
it's
people
like
are
a sleight of hand with information.
Yeah, it's a cutout. All right, Blackbeard. Am I full
Well,
of shit?
I think.
Do you want to add to Redbeard or what?
I can't answer that question, you know, but I will add this. So as we consider like the different media, because you mentioned films, and then we're talking about in particular video games today. You know, I think there's people, like, if you've seen the movie Signs, from I think it was like 2008 or sometime around
Mhm.
then. It was I had Joaquin Phoenix and Mel Gibson, and you know, one of the things that that movie talked about was the difference between people who see signs and the people who just see like a random, you know, nonsensical kind of chaotic environment. And I do think that's a good way to distinguish between persons. And I happen to be a person who sees signs, you know, and there was kind of an on the point, on the nose visual metaphor when they had crop circles there. But
Yeah.
so when it comes to like media, like film and video games, I think that it is put in there intentionally. It could be, I'm going to bring up a couple of them tonight, ideally. And it could be as simple as somebody's looking for a good idea for a video game. And
Mhm.
it's like, well, everybody loves a mystery. And what is a conspiracy but some kind of like mystery? It's like, well, you think that, but what if it's really this, you know? And it doesn't mean that they aren't real. I love them, but I don't. It's like what I think is accurately reflective of reality is not like it doesn't span the whole breadth of like all conspiracies. Like I don't think that they're all true necessarily, but I do think that some of them are true. And I think that, you know, the idea that they would put it into a video game in order to inform or warn people, that's not why I think that they do it. And I do think that it is done. It's called predictive programming.
Mhm.
And there's a large class of people who think that the reason that it is done, and I happen to not necessarily be one of those people. I have a different reason I think that it's done. But the most popular like suggestion for why these companies use predictive programming is because they believe that if they're going to do something which the majority of the population would find to be detrimental to their way of life, health, wealth, faith, whatever it may be, that it incurs a karmic debt for having done something bad. But if I get your consent to it, and it's called it's tacit consent. It's acquiescence is called it in law. And what it means is that, well, I was going to do this bad thing. I have now informed you of that. If you do not resist me, I'm going to assume that you're okay with it. I don't think necessarily that that is what's happening. I think it's actually far stranger than that, but
Mhm.
that's one possibility, and that's probably the most popular one that I've heard.
Yeah.
So we are having a little bit of technical difficulty with you. So I'm just going to kind of repeat,
lose you.
and also for me, you guys already
Yeah.
had this conversation. You're back and doing a little better now, Stephen. We might be having some
I think I
technical
lost
issues.
you.
Yeah, can you get us now? Yeah, I think
Yep.
we may have
Yep.
lost Stephen. But just to his
Yep.
point, as he was breaking up, he was talking about tacit agreement, right?
Mhm.
And so,
Okay.
you know, people should understand that. I mean, because it's tacit approval, tacit authority. I mean, like
Yep.
it's that tacit. It means like, hey, you didn't say no, so therefore I'm going to assume
Yep.
yes. You know, like
It's assumed consent.
well, exactly. Yeah, you know, it is. It's assumed consent. It's tacit
Yep.
agreement. You know, it is. And I like that point you just brought up.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not 100% on board with your guys' argument about the video games, but I'm kind of warming up to a little bit more. And well, here, I'll just turn it over to you. So again, I think, you know, when it comes to video games, you know, for me, I think I can make a stronger argument when it comes to movies and shows. But I think, but I guess why wouldn't it also then apply to video games? If you're going to hire consultants from these industries, here, let me just make it more clear what I'm saying. I think the guy who's writing the code, the guy who's making the game, or, you know, that individual by themselves doesn't have the placement or access, doesn't have the information, doesn't have the history in that. It's the outside consultant that they're bringing in. And I think, well, but, you know, but to Stephen's point, well, but that doesn't mean that person isn't curious and isn't intelligent. It's like, hey, come on, man. You know, I watch this and I read this and I see this and like, and to your point, who doesn't like a good mystery? Well, what's a better mystery? Well, I could do a mystery about was Roswell real, or, you know, like, and, you know, so I'm going to do my game having to do something about Roswell, and through hiring consultants and, you know, these people to, you know, like Corso or some of these other guys, maybe you're getting some insider info and you're finding a way to build that into the game. And I don't want to like give it away, but like we already talked about, I know the game that you and I've referenced, but so because it just seems pretty odd that some of that stuff is in there. Right. So,
right. Well, yeah, and just to kind of build off of that particular game, and I think it was
Fallout.
Fallout 3.
Yeah, Fallout.
The Fallout series in general, and there are a couple undertones that I think are kind of interesting in that. In the fact that in how they got to putting it in the game, again, like we've said, could be left open because we don't know. Maybe there was somebody that used to work for X, Y, or Z, or the alphabet soups, and they're just like, this might be a really intriguing idea, or look, there's something that people need to know. But the point being is, what's interesting about that game series, and I think, perhaps like even the Metal Gear, like Steven's brought up before, is it actually outlines certain political environments, certain historical environments. And not only that, but if you look at Fallout 3 in particular, they had resource wars. And they predicted how that happens, and their timeline diverged shortly after World War II from our actual in real life timeline, which is kind of interesting because, it's to me, you have to have kind of a foresight of where you suspect the future might go to a certain degree to make it believable. So the primary enemy was China in that game. Where are we at today?
And also half of those bunkers, or half of the things you were finding, were little hidden Chi-Com listening posts and stuff. I mean, and that, I hate to say it, this is where you kind of started getting me with this. I'm like, well, that's mirroring reality. We've got Chinese police stations. We've got secret Chinese freaking COVID labs or whatever, in California. So we're already seeing some of that stuff. So,
And I think it's interesting too, because one of the other underlying things that occurred very much so in that particular universe. And again, this is all very open-ended, but is you had a very strong sense of corporatism, to where corporate sentiments dictated a lot of what that particular government did in that universe, to where they started replacing people with robots. They started using intelligence operational systems. It's almost 84-ish, but in a video game setting, in the way that they've done this.
And so I just got to throw this in there before we turn this, because again, now I'm kind of starting to warm up to your guys' argument a little bit more, because just using Fallout. So, and you were talking with the corporate thing, just look at the West right now.
Yeah.
I mean, we are becoming more of a corporatocracy than we are almost anything else. The pharmaceutical companies, are dictating what you're going to do.
Or even like a technocracy or
same.
I
was just I was just trying to stick with corporate because you said it, but it's the same thing, a technocracy. Blackbeard, I know you were having some technical issues of your own there, technocracy guy, but are you there with us? And did you hear enough of that to kind of chime in?
I don't know that I heard enough. It's just I got a new router system I'm trying to get working, and it's been kind of a mess. So
there's the corporate side of it. God dang
it. See, I've already said something controversial. But
we were just picking up. We were picking
the
up.
Fallout series is.
I was just going to let you know where we were picking up. So we were picking up when you were talking about that tacit, that tacit complicity, or that tacit agreement or understanding. And we went with that. And then we kind of brought it back over to the Fallout, talking about, so if nothing else, it's done a great job. I mean, I guess, what are the odds though that a game is actually doing predictive,
deliberately or indirectly,
exactly.
Or whatever.
Chinese paramilitary operating inside of America, doing these type of things, corporate takeovers, corporate business. And that's it. If nothing else, it seems odd that not odd. It just seems pretty interesting and fascinating how it's mirroring what we're starting to see in society.
It's bizarre, isn't it? To say the least. It's bizarre. But what were you going to say, Stephen? You were going to say something about Fallout, I believe.
No, we just lost Blackbeard again.
Yep.
Now he's back. There he is. Can you hear us, sir? That is I'm going to leave that up there. That's actually a really stern face.
That's a very ominous.
But see, now if he had a full beard,
I'm going to move closer to the router. I'm going to disconnect and move close to the router because this is not working.
Yeah.
So I'll be right back.
We'll hold it down for you.
We'll hold the fort. All right. So, okay. So
Yep.
going back into what you're saying is,
Yep.
but honestly, if that would have been a full beard in a face, it wouldn't have been as ominous. See, he had more of a pirate look. I mean, and he had that look in his face. It was like, oh, that guy's going to.
It may have been a little more stoic though. It did have some of the underpinnings of a stoic.
A little Marcus Aurelius, kind of stoicism right there. Yeah, possibly. All right, but back on point as we're waiting for Blackbeard to come back on. Well, see, he's got a pirate name. I mean, see there, it's pirate, Blackbeard. But no, so on to your guys' point, and
U.S. Congress is calling me.
That's not even a joke. Our phones are on.
I have no problem. U.S. calling that. No, I don't think so. Not today.
All right. So just like we're talking about shit that's going on in video games, which may or may not mirror reality or may have been intentionally based, like that just actually happened right there. Like we're sitting here talking about what's the guy from the X-Files, the smoking guy, the Marlboro guy or whatever. Yeah. And then all of a sudden Redbeard gets a call from the U.S. Congress in the middle. This is a shit show of a podcast. I'm just
nervous to drive home tonight.
I'm just letting everybody know. I'm just letting everybody know right now. This is hands down already the most fun, but the biggest shit show of a podcast we've had. Did you see what just happened, Blackbeard?
No.
I got a call from the U.S. Congress.
For real?
He held the phone up. So I looked over. So all of our phones are on mute, but there just said U.S. Congress, and we were like, what? And then
it's U.S. Congress.
Missed call.
Maybe they'll leave me if it, like I'm always said, if it's important, leave me a message. So we'll see if it's important or not.
Well, so we were trying to cover the slack as you repositioned, and
that couldn't have happened.
And that actually was perfect filler. But just one final apology, and hopefully we'll get this train back on the rails here. Everybody watching or listening, but it's already. I already knew the episode was going to be like this.
Yeah.
But as we were trying to say, as we're again repositioning.
Mm-hmm.
It is of interest, though, that whether it's by design or by, again, is it coincidence? Is it intentional? Mm-hmm. It almost doesn't matter because here it is. It really is happening. It is mirroring. And so maybe there is a little something to that. Yeah. Now, I don't want to get down into astronomy and stuff like that, but maybe there's some other type of reasons why these people come together or these thoughts are germinated and into ideas that become a game or a movie or something like that. But it does. I'm kind of starting to warm up to the idea a little bit more.
It begs some questions.
Yeah, at least you got to be scratching your head saying, come on, what the hell's this all about? So just on that note, I mean, I'll just say this, and then we got to bring it over to you and Blackbeard, and finish, get us back on track in the podcast and going back in video games. But just what was it? 2 podcasts that we were talking about that show, Utopia. That took place before the recent, the what are we calling it? The AC or the BC?
The BC.
The after COOF. But that took place in that period before COOF, right? And there it is, and it's interesting to me how many similarities in the the hierarchy of the evil figures and the people trying to figure it out and what it will do to humanity. And this is now starting to play out more and more as we start learning more and more. So I don't know. I mean, I'll save my comments on that until you guys get a chance to talk more. So let's.
Yeah, I was going to say, so Stephen, you were going to play off of something pertaining to Fallout, and I am kind of interested to hear what you have to say about that.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
Well, I have a statement and then a question. So it's made by Bethesda Studios, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I think I see where he's going with this already.
Where's that located?
Yeah, it's
isn't that Bethesda, Maryland?
Yep.
I mean, I thought that's what they called it, Bethesda, right?
Yep.
It is.
I mean, I honestly don't know.
Yeah. That's
where it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where are you going with that?
You might not like where he's going.
No, I want to hear. No, I think I know, but I don't want to assume. Where are you going with that?
Yeah.
Is it near anything?
Near a lot of things.
So it's very close to that.
Fair enough.
Well, I mean, so kind of going into your whole thing about predictive and tacit. I mean, like, I mean, I don't know if you're implying that it's a front company. I mean, is that
I
what
don't.
or are you
wouldn't
just
go
saying that
far.
because
I
of its
mean,
location, that if you did
It-
need to have
it would be
consultants, there'd be a lot
convenient.
of
It would be convenient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
okay. Well, continue.
Well, I think the game I really want to talk about is the Metal Gear series, which is actually from Japan. That's from a company called Konami, or at least, yeah, they still own the rights, I believe, to that. But
Yeah.
it was just interesting because, especially when you get into like, well, even in the first game, it involves like human cloning and things like that, and that's not particularly novel. That's been around for a long time, or at least cloning has. I mean, when did they clone Dolly? That was quite a while ago.
Yeah.
But when you get to the second series, it's called Metal Gear Solid 2: The Sons of Liberty. And in that, there is a group that's called the Patriots, which are operating out of the White House, which I find is kind of a weird choice that they made that, but whatever. And but it's what's interesting about it is that the whole thing, you're playing the game the whole time, and you're supposing that you're there to deal, you're on like a covert stealth mission that's responsible for these things. The series is called Metal Gear because it's basically bipedal, robotic, usually manned vehicles to deliver nuclear warheads. Which, I mean, that's a pretty intense kind of idea there.
Yeah.
But then what you find out at the end is that the whole thing didn't involve that on the grander scheme of things. That what it was about was a psychological operation that they were using on this soldier in order to test basically a program that they were attempting to run, and not figuratively a program, both a program and a literal program, because what you come to discover at the end is that these patriots that are running everything are actually artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And what they do is they talk about, it discloses in this long like dialogue between the person who was speaking into your ear the entire time and the character that you were playing. It discloses things like information, kind of I don't want to say restriction, but like if you were pruning a bush. It talks about how we're drowning in truth, and they don't mean that in the sense of objective truth. They mean it in the sense of all the subjective truths of everybody's got an opinion in everybody's mouth. And there's just we went from living prior to the Gutenberg press, where books were not readily available because scribes had to sit down and manually copy them by hand, to the printing press, where books became more available. And then you enter the information age, and they're like, well, people are drowning in information. And so our responsibility, and this is the AI speaking, is to create context for the information, because in so doing, we therefore frame your perception of what reality is in order to steer you, because you are not responsible enough to be able to ascertain what truth is and how to devote your time or information to create the civilization that you think you want.
Well, and what I'm finding very interesting of that right now is, I mean, just look around you for the last, 2 to 3 years. I mean, what you just described, and I just saw you just kind of take a deep breath and smile a little bit.
Yeah.
What you just described is exactly what has been going on. Now, whether that's AI, I mean, people can make an argument like, half the things that we see on TV or whatever, is that really a body double? Is that a fake? Is it a deep fake? It doesn't matter, because I think what I'm kind of liking of what you just said, Blackbeard, and now I'm kind of seeing your guys' conversation a little bit differently, is, wow, is that just coincidence? Like, like that from the game, we're seeing it happening in real life. And and again, unless you've been living under a rock, that's what's been going on. Because you just, Blackbeard, as you described the game and that conversation with the AI and the character, the character that you're playing, I mean, isn't that what everybody's saying to us right now? Like, oh, there's too much information, and we got to, there is, free speech isn't absolute. All these things about controlling and setting those parameters to get rid of all of those other narratives that is indeed taking place right now in the world around us.
I also think it's. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add, as far as Metal Gear goes too, the lead character, a lot of people, now this game came out in 2001. Okay. Now we had the internet, but it wasn't like it is now. I mean, actually, it was a lot more free in a lot of ways, but it wasn't the same kind of deluge. And we didn't have the information, at least that was so obvious, the kind of like narrative pruning of what you can see and experience in that. But in this game, also, the character's name is Raiden, okay, which is like the lightning god of Japan. And why that matters is because lightning has always been associated with different gods that tie into this system, such as Baal or Baal. He wielded a lightning bolt. And in Greece, he was called Zeus, and he wielded a lightning bolt. And lightning struck a tree, and the fire was lit, and the flame of technology began. So you have this character called Raiden. Now, the other interesting thing is that he's based off of a Japanese motif, and I don't recall the name of it. I can look it up, but I wouldn't be able to pronounce it correctly anyway, so I don't know how much it matters. But it's the idea they have like this almost like hermaphroditic quality to this character. And some people are upset because you went from like a Clint Eastwood kind of character with the original Solid Snake to this guy who's kind of, you know, softer, kind of in between, where you're not really sure, is this really a man? Is this a woman? I mean, what's it mean? And that is predictive of the world that we're in at this time.
Yep. All right. Well, this is starting to get a little interesting. You know, that's kind of weird. Take it away. This is your guys's.
Yeah, no, it's I do find it kind of interesting how when you evaluate this discussion at large, like there's so much to go into. This is an endless conversation. But what I think is even more interesting, rather, you know, and we'll stay on the games, obviously, in the entertainment and media side of it, but is it not interesting to you guys how we've started to see our language defer to people as NPCs or the main character? Like, and it's striking to me because it, like, at what point do we defer to each other as like a non-playable character, or like something that's just there as an asset in that world to not really be done anything with, or they're there for specific reasons and that's it? Like, it's almost as if like this notion of accepting a level of programming is very much being influenced by almost like popular media. You know, and not necessarily at fault of the games or the development, but I think it's interesting how we evaluate ourselves as people through being media. We are media to be consumed.
Well, I'm going to throw this back over to Blackbeard and for you as well, though. But like, I guess my question would be, have we not seen that throughout time? Maybe the language was different, but like, you know, back in the 30s, wouldn't there have been a different slang word for somebody, you know, who just was going along to get along, or you know, or you know, and I'm sure it was back the same thing in the 1400s. That guy just always does what the king or, you know, whatever wants. I mean, is that kind of the same thing, guys? I mean, so that's so to me, as interesting as I find what you just said, I'm also wondering if doesn't that just repeat itself throughout history? Every generation or every era, epic is going to have its equivalent of that. Blackbeard, this is definitely up your line of expertise. Am I off base, or is there something to be said for that, or am I just missing it completely?
No, I think that's exactly right. It's just a matter of, you know, what are the mediums that people are interacting with in the age that you're in, and that's where you'll go, because you're trying to shape culture below the threshold of people's conscious awareness, so that when ideas are introduced at a later date, you'll have this, you know, intuitive, just kind of knee-jerk reflex reaction that, well, it was, I mean, yeah, that's the way it was always going, right? But it could go infinite number of possible ways, but you'll feel that it should have gone and was always going that way, and you're never really sure where you got that notion, that idea. And it's because it was given to you below your awareness through media since you were a child. I mean, is there a generation now that hasn't been raised on television? I guess now they have tablets and TikTok, but it's still, you know, I guess that's where you'd look for it today. Even I'm sure TikTok is filled with it.
Well, I mean, just one little stupid side point, but to the point you just raised, I mean, it's been a little while now, but I saw a video maybe 4 or 6 months ago, and it's a bunch of soldiers in basic training, and they all have freaking cell phones.
Yeah.
Like, so to your point, like that was,
was
they weren't around when I was in
never
basic
happened,
training,
yeah.
but the military there's not a
Yeah.
chance in hell. It would have been like, yeah, you put it in with your personal possessions, and you'll get it at the end of AIT.
Right.
Like, no, you're not going to be on a cell phone, while we're waiting to
Right.
do push-ups or the chow hall or whatever we were doing. No, not at all.
You'll do a wall sit while you wait or something.
Yeah, exactly. But so I'm kind of glomming onto this a little bit more because again, so maybe hell, it actually even begs the question of like, I don't want to get too into a rabbit hole or esoteric, but like, you got a lot of people talk about maybe our lives, our existence. This is really nothing more than a simulation. We're in a computer program. I personally believe in God. I don't believe that, but I'm starting to see some similarities between what you guys are talking about. Maybe this is the Matrix. Maybe it does repeat, but it takes a different form or a different shape, or the messaging, to Blackbeard, to your point, is a little bit different this time. And now, back then it would have been print media and it would have been songs. Well, now it's the U.S. Senate calling you up, or it's a freaking video game, and everybody's playing video games on their phones.
Think about it this way too. Like I know it's very cliche to bring this up, but is the media that we know today, and even you could go back 50 years, 100 years, doesn't really matter, but is it not reminiscent of that cliche of like bread and circuses? Give them games and they will be distracted, and it's like, to a certain degree, like you should do something in your leisure time that doesn't require necessarily a ton of responsibility. It's good for the soul to a certain degree, but to a point, I think we've gotten to a point to where it's become very addictive, and I think that's and I think that level of addiction, right? You're like the phones and stuff like that. I think that level of addiction, very much like the bread and circuses or the gladiatorial arenas. I do believe that in part is by design, and because they're like, hey, if we can keep them distracted enough to where they don't worry about these issues that we say are out of their control, like this is not for you. Because this was also a very, if you look at that time in Rome as they're on their downfall, if you will, one of the very arrogant things is, like there are people that are made for government, and then there are people that, are not made for government. There's people that, are in a position of understanding matters of the state, and those that aren't. And and you also saw this during the Soviet Union. You saw this during, the Nazi regime, to where they segregated and they had these classes of people that you either were at that point considered worthy of knowing matters of the state, and then otherwise you're that NPC that you're not intelligent enough to do this, but we'll give you some bread and circuses to make you feel better.
And I would actually, and I got to turn this over, but are we not there right now? I mean, what you just said at the end. There are already so many people and so many politicians, both sides of the aisle, that say we're smarter. We'll figure this out. You guys just go along, or you just need to listen to the science, or listen to us. And if you criticize me, you're criticizing science. So to the point you just made, the point both of you are making now. So again, is this predictive programming, Blackbeard? Is it part of something more nefarious?
Yeah.
So I guess I'm going to use that to turn it back to you guys. Are we seeing people planting real life Easter eggs in our entertainment, or is it just the cycle is repeating and this is just our modern version of what you just said?
Again, it's not even an absolute conversation, because there's so many things that you can derive it to.
Well, let's just try to keep on whether these are real life, and maybe there's good patriots out there trying to like wake us all up, or maybe it's all part of predictive programming.
Well, there's another option, actually. It's a bit more mystical. And I'm not saying that this is the case. I'm just throwing out the things that I'm aware of, okay? There is a branch of magic which is called egregore magic. It's named for the Watchers from intertestamental, it was the Old Testament as well, but particularly a lot of it was written in, say, First Enoch. But it's also mentioned in Daniel. But that's what the name egregore means. I believe it's Greek. And the idea is it's very similar to the concept or the conception of a tulpa. and it's a branch of magic. And what it says is that if there is sufficient collective belief, then you will, not figuratively, you will literally manifest something through that shared collective belief. And so if you wanted to, if you were a believer in that kind of a magic, then you would put into the mass consciousness the things that you want the people to make real for you, for the world that you want. So it's, well, the first option was a little bit more pragmatic. It's just like, well, you're not surprised when something happens. The other one is more mystical or woo, in the sense of maybe somebody is using us to direct the flow of history itself by causing us to literally manifest via magic the things that they desire the world to be.
Yeah.
I just got to throw this out there. Like, so now I'm starting to warm up to this whole concept, because you just made me think of the whole WEF and Harari and other people like him who, like, I'm not making this up, so YouTube F off, fact checkers F off. They're on video saying exactly what Redbeard or Blackbeard, what you just said. They're coming out and saying, hey, look what we just learned. We now know that through this medium and this messaging, we can get people to give up all kinds of shit.
Right.
And to me, as you were just saying that, Stephen, that's what was going through my head. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's just another example of what do you want to say? Tail wagging the dog wagging the tail, whatever. But that has just happened in just our very recent history. So I like that a little bit even more now. I'm not 100% sold on guys leaking information in video games, but I'm kind of starting to see, it just seems funny. So for me, and for anyone watching or listening, I play video games. I mean, I've got some video games and stuff, but I don't think I have your guys' background and knowledge on a lot of these. But I do like a good movie, and I do like a good book. So I see some of that in more modern nonfiction in a lot of movies, and I'll save my movie. We talked about this before, but I'll save that until later. But I kind of want to bring you guys back over to video games, because I know, Stephen, you've got some more things to add, and I know you haven't really even quite gotten to your point yet. So whoever wants to go next. But I do like what you said. That was just incredibly interesting to me. It's like, no, you're absolutely right. Magic, whatever you want to call it. I mean, like, again, Stephen just did a great job, very literate, very historical, bringing in, and the linguistics, but whatever you want to call it, magic. I mean, what's, again, I'll just do a movie line. I'm gonna screw this up, but basically, fiction, some of these science fiction, what is that? Like today's science fiction is tomorrow's reality, right? So like, oh, that's all science fiction until that, whatever that thing is invented or discovered, and then it's science fact, right? So am I picking up what you guys are putting down, right? I mean, and to some extent, I'm not saying you're saying it quite that way, but Stephen, your whole comment about magic, that's what it made me think is like, well, we're seeing it, what you're saying, but we call it something different now. Am I picking it up right?
Arthur C. Clarke said that any sufficiently advanced technology was indistinguishable from magic.
Well, you want to say that one more time just to put emphasis on it? I mean, seriously. No, I'm not even joking.
Arthur C. Clarke, oh man, there's some things like, I don't know if I want to get into, but Arthur C. Clarke said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
I mean, I'm just going to kind of let that lay in particular, because I mean, that just kind of speaks for itself. It's like a good steak. You just got to savor what's said there and kind of think about what's going on. As we were talking, I don't know why, but Stephen and Mark, I don't know if you've ever played any of the Assassin's Creed games.
I played one. I played like the first one, and it wasn't mine.
It's a different type of game, but I've always found those intriguing, as well as many in that kind of genre, because another trend that I've seen well before like the 2020s, but I found that there's also a very strong illusion or like a strong like tendency, if you will, to go back to, like the Roman times or something like that. And I don't I don't know if there's necessarily like a projection that maybe they're trying to create, like, this is how we should live, or there's something there. But I've always found it interesting because it's not the only series or game that's done that. And we've seen so much media surround the Roman times and the Viking times and stuff like that. And I find it kind of odd that, like, what is the obsession? Because it seems like there really is a mild obsession in the very least of, that type of media and that allure.
So before we turn it over to Blackbeard, so again, this is where I wasn't on, I was very, had a conflicting opinion than you guys, because to the point you just made, well, it's because the world isn't like that anymore.
Yeah.
And so there's a romanticism, there's a fantasy, there's, things were done differently then, like there's violence in current culture, but it's not that type of violence. It isn't the expansion of empire or true good versus evil, Jason and the Argonauts or Hercules. It's, or the 300, at Thermopylae. It's not that. Now it's, a guy trying to defend some people in a subway station against so I think that appeals to all of us, because at some level, if you're paying attention, you want to go back to simpler times where, and they may have been more violent times, but they were still simpler times. I mean, it just was. It was like good versus evil was pretty black and white. Survival of the human species was pretty black and white. Empire building was pretty black and white. Whether, again, today we sit and criticize these things, like, okay, everybody in humanity, there's not a single culture in humanity in the history who hasn't done something like this, right? So to me, I think, so even on that one, I think that's just more simply because it's of interest, it's history. And if you're
if it's a romanticized history, it's still something you can feel invested in.
Well, just like the ticker, right? Like, are you not entertained, right? Okay. That's a character from a movie, right? Did he really play that role with, Commodus and Marcus Aurelius? I don't think so, right? I mean, and again, I like history, and that's not really how the whole thing went down. But it's nice. It's fantasized, and it makes it
palatable.
Yeah, and it's palatable, and it's a believable story. It kind of goes into it. It plays on so many different aspects of what we thought Roman culture was like, or how we would want to romanticize, this really, like, I mean, his passion was, he was a man, he was honorable, and he was a soldier, but his time was up, and he just wanted to go back to his wife and spend time with his family because he earned that right. That's, to me, so if we're talking Easter eggs in entertainment, that's something that, whether it's in literature, movies, or games, that is a theme, a subject that's always going to appeal to people.
And I like kind of what you brought up there, because it also shows kind of the other side of, like, it doesn't have to be bad.
Yeah, exactly.
These can be very palatable things that invoke an interest in something that we may perceive as being positive or better, or it may be a self-reflection of, like, how we've fallen, but yet this is what still could be. And to me, that goes into Stephen's point.
Again, so even maybe that is like, maybe there's gamers, code, guys making games, guys and gals, coding it, and they're like, hey, we want to have a positive theme here. We want to, like, import positive messaging. So again, perceptive, or predictive patterning. Blackbeard, did we just say stupid things, or are we on track here still?
No, I think that's exactly right. I don't take any of the films that are, allegedly historical too seriously. I take them with a grain of salt, but I enjoy them and I like them. I think it's a topic perhaps for a different podcast, but, with a movie like Gladiator, it's not always on point, but there's a lot more, like, masculine energy in it than there is in a lot of other films anymore at all. And that kind of appeals to us because there's something about a man standing with a sword against another man, just you and me, a state of honor. It's like a duel. It's like, that's how
and in this case, he's standing against a tyrant, right? He's standing, it is a good versus evil on a multiple levels. I mean, both from the, bring us back to this view. I mean, if we're just going to go down that road, I think there's a lot to be said. There's a societal issue, there's a familial issue, and then there's the larger, when evil takes over your government, you got to speak out and you got to do something, you know, and even when it, you know, he was dealt the shit end of the stick.
Yeah.
You know, he tried to do the best he could with it. Right.
And,
you know?
and I think just briefly to that point too, Mark, like I also think in a very entertaining way, that's kind of where Spartacus fulfills that too, because it's a very similar situation, albeit it's looked at to where you have these people that are actually in this ludus, and they're and you see the evolution of, you know, he's disenfranchised, he kind of accepts his fate, but then there's moments where he's like, no, like this, what am I doing? Like, this is not good. And it kind of emphasizes even farther more when you look at like the Spartacus angle of people realizing like, I am not, like, this is not okay. And this is what's actually taking, and it shows those little cracks that start to happen.
The fissures. Yeah.
And whereas like, it's not that Gladiator doesn't, but Gladiator was very much a very personal story, I feel, where not saying Spartacus wasn't, but
well, Stephen just said it's a very masculine story.
Yeah.
But you know, but on that same note though, but it's also a very feminine story because, you know, Claudius's sister, I can't remember her name which was, it's kind of implied or inferred that, you know, her and Maximus used to have a thing with each other way back in the day, you know, so there is some of that in the movie as well. And there's some cultural things. So again, see how we're going down the friggin' rabbit hole. But I want to kind of bring it back to the video games, because I feel I'm more capable of talking about modern cinema than I am about video games. And you guys, just in the pregame, you know, talking about, you know, again, whether Fallout or Metal Gear or Blackbeard, what was that? Not Ex Machina.
Deus Ex.
Deus Ex.
Fantastic series.
Do you guys want to jump into that and then and maybe kind of bring these wagons back over into line and get us on the right path again? So again, we're talking about, is it possible that people have been leaving, just to use the term Easter eggs, you know, but we're talking about like maybe like, you know, information drops or whatever you want to call it, but using modern media to do so.
Almost like and I don't know if this is exceeding the point, but maybe like a subtle media like Dead Drop. To where, it's for everybody and not a specific contact.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's exactly. No, I see that. That is where I'm kind of starting to warm up to when I start looking at it from that side. That's what that Easter egg is.
Yeah.
I'm leaving a dead drop there. And if you're smart enough and you're playing the game or watching the movie.
And it can be passed off as a very subtle, like, oh, we thought this was a creative thing.
And I'm never going to go to jail for violating my terms of, my security clearances and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So,
all right, Blackbeard, let's bring you back into the fight, sir.
I think that his observation about Assassin's Creed is actually very astute. It's assassin, as I understand it, comes from the word hashish, which is a portion of the marijuana plant. And the legend is basically that the guy that was leading the group of the original assassins got them really high and convinced them they were in paradise, and if they would only, execute people and die for him, then paradise would be assured for them. So they were called the Hashashins, or became the Assassins. And the Assassin's Creed is their belief, and they battle the Knights Templar. So the Templar were originally a monastic order that were kind of brought into the fold of Rome, but that would have been in opposition. That's why the first one takes place during the Crusades. That would have been in opposition to the Mohammedans, which would have been the Hashashins. And if you look at it today, many people believe, because one of the highest degrees of the York Rite of Freemasonry, which is bigger in Europe than in the U.S., is the Knights Templar, and it was Jacques de Molay on Friday the 13th, which is why it's considered to be unlucky, who was executed by King Philip of France, which would have been under the monarchy of the Pope. And so
Well, it's also when King Philip just destroyed the whole Knights Templar order. I mean, they were almost
Yeah.
all of them rounded up and like either imprisoned or killed. Yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah.
the real. Yeah. Okay. Continue. Sorry.
So even that, historical game, it plays with that because you fight the Templars in it, and it just goes to like a lot of like mystical kind of things that are like, if you know what you're looking at, kind of disclosing certain elements of history that maybe aren't so obvious.
Okay, so but help me better understand that. So in a game, you're using that historical. I mean, again, and that's based on fact, right? I mean, like we do know Knights Templar existed. Da 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 da. Mohammedans were real. The root word of assassin, where it comes from. And it's I guess it's kind of origins and drugs, but that's we've seen that done multiple times in history. I mean, honestly, berserkers, our war in the Philippines, at the back in turn of the century, back in the early 20th century, same thing. I mean, the Moros were doing cocaine. Well, I don't know if it was cocaine. Don't anybody throw me under the bridge, but the Moros would get all drugged up and they, hell, honestly, if you even just go back into terrorism, I mean, into what you're just kind of saying, that was an era. I mean, it was an era where why am I drawing a blank here, Allison? Where the anarchists and that anarchist movement was a huge thing, and like assassinations were a big part of it, and there was a spiritual or religious aspect to that whole period in time for these people who were doing it. So I think that kind of plays into what you were just saying, Stephen, but I still want to kind of bring that back into, and you started off with the games, but so where does that leave us? Are we seeing Easter eggs? Are we seeing little snippets of truth, or is it coincidental that because look, I think the three of us, if we were smart enough to know how to code, we're smart enough on our history, we could probably come up with a cool video game, right? That would have plays that would pertain to today and might be predictive for something that what we think the future is going to look like 20 years from now as well.
Yeah.
Or to the point you guys were making. Or maybe it's just a diamond in the rough, and 20 years later, everybody wants to play that game because now that game has meaning or significance in what's going on in that point, that moment in history, that moment in time.
Right.
All right. Which one of you guys want to? All right, Stephen.
I'm going to read to you the synopsis for Deus Ex. It's a bit lengthy, so stop me if I'm running on too long.
Yep.
First of all, Deus Ex is short for Deus Ex Machina, which is which was an element of Greek theater in which the situation was in such a place narratively where it couldn't be resolved. It's over, basically. And then out of nowhere, the god would literally descend. They had a mechanism to bring him down onto the stage. I mean, the actor, right? That was called Deus Ex Machina. Well, it's a play on words, though, in this series because it involves the dream of transhumanism. Deus Ex Machina, and like Mark had mentioned in a previous interview, he mentioned Ex Machina, the film, which also involves artificial intelligence creating a humanoid. So Deus Ex is God from or in the machine. Just like the ghost in the machine.
Right.
So what this series is about, it says Deus Ex takes place in 2052 in an alternate history where real world conspiracy theories are true. I would just admit that a lot of them are true in point of fact. These include speculations regarding black helicopters, vaccinations, and FEMA, as well as Area 51, the Echelon Network, Men in Black, chupacabras, and gray aliens. Mysterious groups such as Majestic 12, the Illuminati, the Knights Templar, the Bilderberg Group, and the Trilateral Commission also either play a central part in the plot or are alluded to during the course of the game.
Holy shit.
The plot
I told you to run, Steve.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I'm just like, oh my God. All right, keep going. I need to find this freaking game.
The plot of Deus Ex depicts a society on a slow spiral into chaos. Sound familiar? There's a massive division between the rich and the poor. Sound familiar? Not only socially, but in some cities physically. A lethal pandemic known as the Gray Death ravages the world's population, especially within the United States, and has no cure. A synthetic vaccine, ambrosia, manufactured by VersaLife, nullifies the effects of the virus, but is in critically short supply. Because of its scarcity, ambrosia is available only to those deemed vital to the social order. Those that are, what was the term they used during the last one?
Pleasantness.
Yeah.
It was, give me a second here. It's right on the tip of my tongue. I know what you're saying.
Like the crucial businesses or whatever.
Critical worker or something like that.
Yeah.
Critical employee. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And,
Dude, this
and
is
it
kind of
finds,
getting freaky.
and it finds its way primarily to government officials, military personnel, the rich and influential, scientists, and the intellectual elite. With no hope for the common people of the world, riots occur worldwide, and some terrorist organizations have formed with the professed intent of assisting the downtrodden, among them the National Secessionist Forces of the US and a French group known as Silhouette. To combat these threats to the world order, the United Nations has expanded its influence around the globe to form the United Nations Anti-Terrorist Coalition. It is headquartered near New York City in a bunker beneath Liberty Island, placed there after a terrorist strike on the Statue of Liberty. The main character of Deus Ex is UNATCO agent J.C. Denton, one of the first in a new line of agents physically altered with advanced nanotechnology to gain superhuman abilities. Alongside his brother Paul, who joined UNATCO to avenge his parents' deaths at the hand of Majestic 12. So basically, it starts to involve like deep underground military bases, gray aliens, Area 51, human augmentation, like all the stuff that is popular in conspiracy circles. But it's also all things that happen to be manifesting in one form or another in the world that we're in right now. So to bring it back to your original question, are you a person who sees signs, or are you a person who believes that it's chaos and no one's in control of anything whatsoever? And if you're a person who sees signs, then the question is, was this put in there because it was put in there intentionally? And there's a lot, you can go a long time talking about the stuff that's in that. Did they do that as a disclosure to us, so that, or did they do it as a magical act so that this kind of thing would manifest? I don't know the answer to that with any degree of certainty, but I have my opinions.
Well, and I think also what's really interesting, so I never got the opportunity to play the original game, but I have played the two newer games, and I think what's interesting is there's in both of those games, it gets especially a lot more into it gets farther in depth into all of those issues, because you eventually become an augmented human and you have to deal with a lot of like discriminatory things in the class thing, even though you're in that character's Adam Jensen is the guy's name. But you now have to deal with people at a level, like you actually have to have people skills. You have to understand how to read people in that game, and your decisions will determine outcomes, not only local, but on a much grander scale. So in what it does is a really good way of making you feel very small in a world that is very much the setting of what he's describing. And a lot of the, like, you don't know who you're talking to until basically the end of the game. So you have to disseminate information. The person that you think is a resistance person could be a plant by the Illuminati, and your whole interaction there could have been one big deception by them to get you to do what they wanted you to do. So you have to be caught. Like, the game is so far ahead of its time in so many ways. I would say in each of the iterations, because you don't know if you're being played or if you're, doing the right thing.
But if we bring this all the way back around, then to Stephen's point, Blackbird's point, is it somebody giving us an Easter egg? Is it somebody who, again, is it a sign for the people who can read signs, right? And for those who don't read signs or don't give a shit, well, then it's just a game, or it's over their head and they don't really care, and and it might not even be an interesting storyline or a plot for the game. But for those who are seeing signs, because again, it's too weird almost when you just went down and you just read that whole description
Mm-hmm.
of the similarities to what's transpiring now and what's been going on for the last, again, I'm not even saying the last, 2 to 3 years of unpleasantness. It could even, you could take that back even for the last, 10 to 20 years of what's going on, because everything you're talking about, and look where we are now.
Yeah.
We are already at the point where people want to be augmented humans. Now, most of those people just want to have a chip and implant, to scan their little hand over the, oh, there, I'm paying for my groceries. Look how cool this was. It's more in that game based on that description you just said, but the start is already there. The beginning of that is already there, and people are going along with it willingly. And that raises another question of, well, and I'll turn it to both of you guys, not to go down the rabbit hole of religion, but like others would argue that's the mark of the beast, just like the recent, like little jabs, are you true blood, or or kind of see where I'm going with this, guys? Right. Or I want to turn it over to you, Stephen, because I'm basing it off everything you just said about the game when you read its the description.
Well, I mean, so the question is this, was the people who made the game, were they just really into conspiracy theories and, trolling forums and putting that into, well, that would be a cool narrative. And they just happened to hit the mark really close because a lot of those conspiracies happen to be true. Or were they doing something? And that's really a question as to the motivation. And that's why it'll always have to be, to a certain element, speculative, because I'm not in their minds. I haven't reached out to them if they're still around. So, but I do think that the video games, there's just no question in my mind that they are used to disclose and to direct the culture. And to your point, you talked about the addiction of them. Yeah, I think that's another important element, because addictive behavior allows you to control somebody. Yes. And
but I'll throw this out to you guys. Maybe now it's a good enough time to bring this up. So for me, again, on the video game side, this is maybe more your guys' wheelhouse, although I just found that, Ex Machina, I'm going to have to find that.
It's a fantastic series.
That just seems crazy. But a lot of the other games, again, I've only played a little bit. I haven't done Metal Gear. I only played one of I think it was the very first Assassin's Creed. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to be said in some of that. And that's where, again, I'm kind of like, well, okay, really? But now the more we keep talking about it, I'm kind of falling in line with your guys' argument, because from the entertainment industry side of it, though, I see everything you guys are saying. And again, whether all the way back to Blackbeard's comment about its predictive programming, its tacit approval, but we see this happening more and more often with anything. And I don't want to get a sidebar, but I already can think of like 4 or 5 movies. Like, well, how in the hell did you even know how to make that movie? Yeah. And then a year or 2 years.
It's bizarre, because it's like, how do you even know something like that? Like it gets to a point where it's just like, how do you even know to think of something like this? Like,
because there hasn't been a precedent in history,
or there was sometimes an example.
That's what I'm saying. There was no other precedent. There was no other or there wasn't a piece of literature or something else that made some allusion to it. And
it's alarming.
You took that idea and then you twisted it. You added your own imagination. No, there was no precedent in history for this to even be discussed.
Right.
And Hollywood isn't that creative, so I'm a little circumspect.
So remember in Deus Ex, in the synopsis that I just read, that it mentioned the virus and then the vaccination to, deliver people from this virus. Yeah. Well, it goes on. Analysis of the virus shows that its structure was designed by the Illuminati, prompting Tong to send JC to Paris to obtain their help fighting Majestic 12. Mm-hmm. The Grey Death was intended to be used for augmentation, but Majestic 12, led by the trillionaire businessman and former Illuminatist Bob Page, stole and repurposed it. So you got an evil billionaire using a genetically designed virus to implement human augmentation. Everett recognizes that without VersaLife's UC, Majestic 12 can no longer create the virus and will likely target Vandenberg Air Force Base, where X-51, a group of former Area 51 scientists, have built another one. After aiding the base personnel in repelling a Majestic 12 attack, JC meets X-51's leader, Gary Savage, who reveals that Daedalus, this is a character that the main character was in contact with throughout the game, is actually an artificial intelligence born out of the Echelon program.
Yeah.
I gotta find this game.
Dude, it rabbit holes so
Does,
much.
seriously.
Like, and it's
But not to get too sidetracked
Yeah.
on the game. Let's just keep it focused on like how in the hell would you have been? How would you like?
how do you conceptualize?
That's
something
what I'm
like
saying. Like, how does somebody just what everything you just read,
Yeah.
Steven? How in the hell does somebody come up with that? Like, hey, let's make a game,
that? Mhm.
and here's going to be the framework that the game
Right.
is going to be built around, and then
Yeah.
everything you just said. Again, we're all humans. Everybody's we're all individuals. Some of us are more or less creative than others,
Yeah.
and I get it. There could be a really creative mind that's just
100%.
pulling things. Majestic 12. That's a real thing.
But to have continuity for it all to make sense is what is, I think, kind of a startling point, because you can have a lot of really good ideas, but to be able to weave them to where there's a sense of grounded, like a sense of grounded, like pathway, if you will, to where like, okay, like this all interconnects, it all makes sense, but you may not understand how it all interconnects, but at different depths or levels, like there's a connection some way or another.
And in our current era, our modern era,
Yeah.
we're seeing those things come true. So again,
Yeah.
I've mentioned this before, and Stephen, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but Utopia. It's on a streaming service. Don't watch it there. You can find it on YouTube, and it's actually the uncensored version. But again, and then Nicolas Cage. I might be wrong, but didn't Nicolas Cage do a movie about a train wreck like a year or two before East Palestine? And it was the same exact effing thing. And then to the point you're making, when you guys are making in video games, and yet we're seeing these things. How many coincidences does it take to equal reality?
Right.
Coincidence.
Yeah.
Like, man, I don't know about you guys, but I don't see that many coincidences in my
Yeah.
life. Even in the course of my whole life. Yeah, I've seen some things. Well, that's coincidental, but not to this level, not to this degree,
not to multiple levels to where it almost becomes normal.
And that goes to, I want to turn over to Stephen, because there it is. I mean, predictive patterning, because now it's becoming normalized. So, now we're being okay with it. Is that for people who are seeing the signs, or is it more nefarious and it's to get people conditioned to this so they accept it? I mean, I think there's an argument about the last unpleasantness that was just really designed to get people conditioned to this. And Harari's coming out and said it. He's like, look, we just condition people. They're going to go along with this stuff. Imagine what we could do this next time. I mean, those aren't my words. Those are his. So, Stephen?
Well, the way they do that is the way that the Metal Gear series, that's why I brought that up. I wish I could just play you the clip. I will send it to you, but that's what they mean when they say they're creating context, because I don't even have to overtly lie to you. I can just tell you enough truth so that it slants your perception of reality in the direction that I want, while still lending it credibility because you looked at it. Well, that's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so it's the creation of the context that matters more than the direct delivery of the information itself. It's the lens through which you perceive what reality is, and information forms you inwardly. That's what information is. Yes. So the control of that information is delivered through a medium, because mediums channel spirits. That's what they do.
And to your point, the more you just say that, the more my eyes are kind of opening up a little bit. Everything that is being quote unquote spoon fed, or being, if you want to use mainstream media, if you want to say that, but so much of what is going on today seems to fall into what Stephen, you just mentioned about, from using Metal Gears. It's a lens is being crafted, and it's glass. It's got to be ground down. It's got to be polished. And that's what's going on right now. And so the the language is even there. Like, you got to listen to us. You got to trust the science. What did CNN say that, like, years ago during the whole Trump thing? Like, hey, there's some documents out there, but you guys can't read them. Only we're the only ones that can read them. So it's to your point, I think, Stephen, of and I'm just going to use a lens, again, whether it's being colored, rose or whatever color it's being colored or how it's being shaped, because a lens, these things help me read right here. But if I look at a distance, it's all distorted.
Yep.
This lens is being filtered or shaped. So whatever I'm being subjected to is going to point me, and I see the same image, or I'm more malleable, therefore I'm more easily manipulated, or I just go along with it, or guys, or we just don't care, and you're just never going to argue, and you're never going to even oh yeah, I'll take another pokey poke, whatever.
Yeah. Well, it's to kind of that.
It's maybe a bad example.
It reminds me of you remember the kaleidoscopes, to where it's like, no, the image you're seeing is real, but it's still manufactured.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I think about that. No matter how many times you change the picture, it might be a different picture. It's still real, but in the end of the day, it's a manufactured image. So what you're seeing is real on the basis that it's there, but it's not real on the basis that it's actually naturally present or what have you. So
and turn this over to Stephen. I mean, to your point, I think, Stephen, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but to what you're saying. So if I keep showing you the 10 images, but I alter 9 of them just slightly.
Yep.
I'm changing how you're actually perceiving, whether it's the Eiffel Tower, Mona Lisa, or whatever it is, whatever you're looking at. Yeah.
In Skyrim, which is also made by Bethesda.
Oh, I'm so happy you brought this up.
Hang
on 1 second. Sorry, I just got to say this for all of our audience. That weird little laughter and exchange those two guys had, I don't know what the hell that was all about, but clearly there was a little gaming geekness going on right there. But all right,
for the record, I just started playing Skyrim again, so I'm really
okay. All right, bringing it back over to Stephen. Go ahead, Skyrim.
Yeah, Skyrim. That's an amazing game. But what I think is interesting is that in their pantheon, they're called the Nine. Their gods are called the Nine. And I think that's an allusion to the idea that there are not 9 planets or celestial spheres, but there's also a history in Star Trek, and there's a great researcher. I cannot give him enough credit. He is a genius, and his name is Chris Knowles. He runs a blog called The Secret Sun. It's all about synchromysticism, if you're so interested or inclined. And he is the first person that I'm aware of who has brought up the fact that Gene Roddenberry was involved with a group who is in New England allegedly channeling the Nine prior to his creation of Star Trek, which is also had a series called Deep Space Nine. And so, the gods were the stars in the ancient world, and so they would have lived in space, right? And we named our planets after the gods. Jupiter is a planet, Neptune is a planet, Mars, and so on. So even in Skyrim, it's I don't know that they're like that's really an instance of them necessarily being like it's the Nine, but there's a pattern there. There's a pattern. Even if you look, this is a testament to it. When you level up in Skyrim, the screen takes you into an astrological projection where you look at the stars, and you're born under a certain sign, and those are all very old ideas, but it's just interesting to me. I think there's also in some darker mystical kind of circles, there was the idea of what they call ascended masters, and if I'm not mistaken, they were also numbered as being 9. It was either 7 or 9, but just found that interesting.
Well, hey, before you respond to that, can you just because I'm writing this down so I can put it in embed it in with this video. So that's Chris. Is it Chris Knowles or Christopher Knowles?
I think he goes by Chris.
Okay, and can you either send me a link to that and I can then embed it, or is there any more information that how can I find that so I can put it in case somebody's interested to do a little of their own research?
Yeah, I'll send you the link.
Okay. All right. We'll include that then. All right. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna nerd out on you quick, Stephen. I used to be an adventurer like you until I took an arrow to the knee.
Boys and
It's
girls, if
such a
you're
good
watching
game.
this podcast, that expression on my face, that was real. I have no idea what the hell they're talking about.
Oh,
right now.
for the love of Talos, get it on with. It's if Skyrim is, and you'd probably dig Skyrim because it's very much a Norse oriented game.
Okay.
So it's, but it's some of the, it's probably one of the most memed games there is out there, or at least one of the quoted ones. Because if you know anything about Bethesda, like what they do really well is they have jank. So it's like in some of the weirdest like dialogue. So it's fun. But
what does jank mean?
it's like you'll be traveling down a road and like all of a sudden a cart and horses will just like blast up into the sky for no reason. So they have glitches and stuff.
Oh, okay. So glitchy.
It's one of those weird things to where you go to Bethesda for the jank, not for the fact that the game works well. So, and anybody who listens,
so your guy gets stuck between walls or weird shit like that, or you fall through. You suddenly fall through the ground, and your guy just and you'll just keep falling. So I've had a game or two like that where you glitch out.
Yeah,
okay.
No, it's anybody who's listening that kind of knows that, like they'll probably laugh about it. There's like, no, yeah, like.
And for all the other people who aren't gamers, you're probably like, what? If you've even like made it this far into the podcast, you're still like, what the hell are these two guys talking about? Seriously, I'm right next to him, and he started laughing when Steven said, Skyrim, and he's choking on it right now. I'm like, okay, here we go. I have no idea what's going on in this one. But not to digress though. Seriously, just to bring it back full circle and to give respect to what you guys are talking about. So again, Steven, you're saying, is it a wink and a nod towards the 9 planets? Is it something celestial, or is it something completely different? I think the question I started kind of asking as we all started talking about this a little bit more, and tonight included, is like, does that even really matter? Because if you're going into, I'm trying to create, I'm trying to shape, and I'm trying to do this, predictive patterning. I'm trying to create an outcome, because again, we've been talking about video games, but I'm looking at a lot of TV shows, movies, not TV shows like, ABC, CBS. I'm talking like more streaming services or independent type of things. Right. I personally think we are seeing a lot more of this happening, and I don't know why that is. So that's why honestly, that's when we talked about this. I'm like, well, that could just be this. But the more we started talking, I'm like, actually, that's a pretty good topic, because it is happening more and more. We are seeing this happen more and more. Like, how in the F did that guy know about this? How is that coming? How is that now suddenly becoming the norm in society, or again, and let's not say the name, because that'll definitely get us banned, but the most recent unpleasantness. And look at all the things before that. And hell, I'm even doing a disservice here. I'm trying to think of it. Is it Pale Horse? So, I mean, there's even in literature, right? Written or acted out entertainment. And then to what you guys are saying, games, there does seem to be this nexus, this convergence of.
Right. And I think that
entertainment meets reality or predicts the future.
And I think, again, and I've probably said this several times, but what I like about this discussion is like, none of us really know. Like, we're just taking a shot in the dark. And the thing of it is it might all be real to a certain degree, to where all of these different things are taking place, or it might be a handful. Like, it's such an expansive look into media, and we tried to narrow it down to games. Like, that's not even like really delving into like music or videos or TV series or movies or whatever. Like, we tried to slim this down and into what we thought would be reasonable, and what we're finding is it's such an expansive it's such an expansive conversation that it's very difficult to do that, because when you talk about one, it's hard to not talk about the others. So,
Steven, I've got some comments on that, but I want you to chime in here first.
Well, I mean, he's right. It's an absolute deluge now, and our frame of reference is going to be the games that we play, continue to play now. So probably more like PC and console. And, you know, the younger generation is probably getting their own right now, and we just don't use it, so we have no idea. But it's like their little, you know, you think they're playing Candy Crush. Like, as an example, my friend has a young son, and he was playing Fortnite, loves Fortnite. And I was like, it's free? And they're like, yeah. I was like, okay, well, I'll try it. I mean, we'll see how it goes. And so I logged in, and not only did I not know what I was doing, the whole thing turned out to be, I guess they changed the theme from time to time. This whole thing was a ritual. Like, I was watching them, the intro, the whole thing was ritual.
Yeah.
All the music, even the way that things were structured in this like synthetic environment in this room we were in, they had a literal giant floating in a bat tank. Like, it was all, I wish I could watch it again. It's been so many, you know, I think it was last year that I looked at it, but it's just, you know it when you see it. You're like, oh, that's that. Oh, that's that. That's that. So, like, they're putting it in just like I mean, the music videos are just the most egregious. I can't even hardly watch them anymore. It's so absurd. But they're blending, they kind of blended music video with the game Fortnite. So while so I talked to my friend, I was like, I thought this is just supposed to be a battle royale thing. And he's like, it is, why? And I was like, dude, there was this in it, and there was this in it. And it was pretty wild, you know. And so all I'll say is, you know, we might even be a bit behind the curve here. I mean, in one way, mentioning a game from the late 90s or early, 2001, I think, was when, well, that's when the Metal Gear came out, but then the other one was in the late 90s. You know, it's a cool thing to do because we've had so much time. So you can look and say, they were talking about that was in that game then, and now I'm walking outside my door and there it is. Like, that's a bit eerie, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that lends credibility to it. But at the same time, all I would say is imagine what the children now are being exposed to that's meant to come in another 10 to 20 years. That's what's concerning to me.
Well, and quickly to that point, Stephen, there has been a lot of conversation around the idea of things like Fortnite and other like Roblox. And Mark, you might be able to really bite into this as well. But how games are being used to groom children.
Yeah.
And like the rabbit, I mean, that's a totally, like, it's in the same realm, but it's like, that's a totally expansive conversation in and of itself, because it's like the implications of that even, and not just like not just in like, you know, a sexual way as it pertains to like,
I
but
I didn't take that in the sexual
connotation.
connotation.
But like gambling is a huge one where you have, they're incentivizing
defense industries. I mean, think of again, a movie.
Yeah.
The book is a little bit better, but Ender's Game.
Yes.
I mean, that's what that was.
And so like, I think, you know, to your point, Stephen, like, I do think that they're targeted, like, they're dropping the level on a much younger audience than even like when we were growing up, to where like I grew up with Tekken, you know, like for people that are super old school, like that game was like, that was it for me. Like, I thought that was the best game ever, but it's like, there wasn't like in Tekken, it's like, it's like Street Fighter, but it's not, it wasn't, you didn't have back then what they kind of had today. I think that's fair to say, would, you know.
Well, no, so that was a great point. And I was just gonna say, but what happened back then in the stand-up consoles, you know, like, you know, again,
right,
Street Fighter or Millipede or, you know, Starfighter, Pac-Man, that was very different. That was, you know, a little bit more entertainment.
Right.
But to Stephen's point, in some of these other games and some of these, you know, anime or videos or again, whatever genre you want to go into, there is much more of a design, a purpose, a message, a theme that's like being subliminally, you know, well, there you go. I mean, go watch. Well, the series was Firefly. The movie was
Serenity.
Yeah, but that whole the Fruity Odie bar, right? You know, I don't know what it's subliminal messaging. So we see this and this technology, you know what? So here's the one thing that I do like about your guys' argument, and I like from the beginning, even though I wasn't really on board with the gaming side of it, is that subliminal messaging, that propagandistic, how we use language, how we use imagery, and how we can, and because look, smarter men and women than us have a better understanding of how this imagery or this language, whether it's spoken language, whether it's written language, whether it's music, or however we interpret it, appeals to us on emotional levels.
Yeah.
And then that leads us in, and that goes into what Steven started off with predictive programming.
Yep.
So, you didn't freeze. You're just taking a really stoic. That was a really stoic pose right there. I thought he was frozen for a second.
I am.
That should have been the image for when we.
If I can get that as a thumbnail, I'm gonna grab that as a thumbnail. That was very stoic.
So, I'm just looking at my laptop up here because I want to make sure I'm not talking out of my butt.
Oh, you
research.
You are never talking out of your butt. Hey, we're at an hour 30, and I'm not saying we have to end this, but this could be one of our shorter podcasts. And I know you've got to bounce.
Yeah.
And I've got one last thing to say, but I want you guys to maybe do your more of the gaming side of it, because I think for anybody watching and listening, we've pretty much laid out the foundation, the groundwork that, hey, look, even in video games, there's something going on here, right?
Yeah.
Again, I don't want to speak for either of you, but is that a fair way of stating what you guys are kind of saying, is that there's something going on here? And if you, to Steven's point, and if you can, and by the way, Signs was a great movie. It's one of those movies that I didn't watch until I probably only watched that 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And I was like, holy shit, how did I not see this movie before? But to your guys' point, Steven specifically, are you the type of person who can, I don't remember what podcast it was, or maybe it was just a conversation we had, but I walk out that door and there's a wood line.
Yep.
How in the hell do I really know that the number of trees I see and what they look like is exactly what you see or what you see, right? It's that so to me, your message that you guys are sharing here is, if you can see it for the truth that it really is, you'll see it for the truth it really is.
Yep.
And if not, you'll just be like, there's 3 trees. And then the rest of us are like, there's 100 trees back there, or whatever, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So, on that, so bring it back into the gaming side of it, guys. Are we just again, I know we're just speculating, we're pontificating here, but is it truth? Is it predictive programming? Is it people leaving Easter eggs? What are we looking at here in reality from your guys' perspective? Or is it, again, just something that it could be this, it could be that? Steven, let's go to you first.
I think that as it concerns the predictive programming aspect of video game media, it is probably, in my opinion, closer to the idea of the egregorian magical system, that they're using it so that our collective subconscious aligns, expects this, and makes it become real. And if you think about this, I'm not saying that we are in a simulation, but you mentioned it, so it's worth addressing, because video games are simulations. That's what they are. And what's happened is we started with theater to express narrative. Then eventually that was tangent with the written word, but then we move into film. We have film. Now we can express it through not just a simulated 2D linear story, but an actual simulated world. Now the story is there. And so it went from out here to right here to right here. And now they want it to be right here. And then they want it to be in here. That's what's happening. And it's some kind of unnatural technological development where they've gone from God in the machine on the stage to God in the machine on your hands to wanting the God machine inside of your head. I think that's where things are going. It's some kind of invasive, non-human kind of thing that's happening. If you want to talk about aliens, I think that artificial intelligence is a good candidate for that.
Yeah.
Well, I personally really just like how you just broke that all down. And if we ever were more professional or more adept at whatever, I would have cut that little segment out, and that would have been a short clip, because I think you just summed it up right there. I think so. For me, this is where I jump on board your guys' argument, is for how you just said it right there. Not that you did get me going too. But that is exactly it. I do think there is some, whether you want to call it evil or malign, but there is something negative about how we're all kind of being pushed and cajoled, or whether we know it or not. We can only go through certain gates, and to Stephen's point, what are even children being exposed to?
Yeah.
Again, we're old. We're not old, but we're old guys. Like what are kids dealing with right now?
Right. Well, and kind of to what Stephen was saying, I would even say that it's to many degrees, it's like a sedated reality. Like what? Because like we're already to a point to where they're talking about nanites.
Yeah.
And putting nanites into your bloodstream.
That's a great point.
And it's like, okay.
And in all fairness,
yeah,
that may actually be already taking place.
Right. And so like, it's like when you evaluate that, like what's not to say that, things that we found joy in being younger, like, and we span, what is it, two generations?
Probably only two. Probably.
So realistically, like even in just that short amount of time, compared to today, like what we experienced, video game media wise, I think is drastically different from what we experience today. And the reason for that, and the reason I say that again is because I think, much like as goes in history, they want to have like some type of sedated reality to where it's like, this is the perception that we are creating for you. And this is the direction that we're trying to get you to go. And as time goes on, like Stephen was saying, is, it goes from sitting back like this to playing on a computer, to having a smaller computer, to having something that's virtual reality. And then again, you could speculate that's where nanites come in, to where now you don't even have to look at anything. You can just visualize it in your mind. But then at that point, and I hate to even bring this movie back up, but remember when I brought up that movie Gamer, to where so it's like, who's to say you can't give
through
away
a neural link,
you give away your free will, and by way of that you now have the ability to control people, and it's like,
so just on that note, because and kind of when I come back to Stephen, I mean, I think you guys both made the same point. No matter how it's being projected or how it's being employed, we are seeing mechanisms that are are being developed to control people.
Yes.
Is that a fair way of saying it?
Yeah.
And you just did it from one angle, and I think Stephen was coming at it from a slightly different angle.
And
but at the end of the day,
that's kind of what I wanted to do was, like,
it's the same, but it's the same. It's at the end of the day, it's the same end result.
Yep.
You're controlling people. It's all about control.
Right.
Stephen?
That's the purpose. I mean, that's at the end of the day, it's control. Absolutely. It's absolutely control.
Enjoyment,
but the question is
reality.
All right, hang on.
Yeah.
All right, okay. Go ahead, Stephen. It comes at the risk of, or the question of.
Well, what it means to be human. That's why that's what Deus Ex is, right? It's that video game or Ex Machina. It's like, what does it mean to be a human being? Because that's something we're going to have to answer for ourselves here if these, technocratic crazy people get what they want. But so, if the other thing to consider too, and I'm not saying this is the case, but if this were a simulation, then we are players in that simulation. Mm-hmm. And when you're playing in the video game, the game is constantly using the engine to render the reality around you, because it's not real, right? It's simulated. You're playing a game. It looks like, well, I'm moving through depth of space, or I just moved vertically, or I just teleported, whatever. I'm shooting a gun, but none of it is real. It's all rendered by the gaming hardware on a moment by moment basis. So what if our reality, what if this is the hardware and we're rendering it, and that's why that magic kind of thing would work? I can't say that that's the case. I'm just saying that if that were, then it would make sense why you would implant the ideas, because then the perceptions would literally become reality as it's moving along. Just something to think about.
Yeah, I just got to jump in. I love what you just said. It made me remember something I think I saw it kind of made some news about 6 months ago. But to your point, Stephen, like, is this a simulation? I think I may have thrown that out earlier. Like, are we actually living in a simulation? But there was a study that came out about, maybe it was a year ago, a year to 6 months ago. Don't anybody hold me to this. But to your point, Stephen, it had to do about how light reacts when light is being seen or observed and when light isn't being observed. You know what I'm talking about? I think what you just said, that made me think about that. So how do we not? So whether this is a simulation or not, it's almost irrelevant. That question still pertains. It's like, well, when, again, when a tree falls in the woods, does it make a sound? Well, how in the hell would you know if you're not there to hear? It's that kind of, it's Schrodinger's cat. It's that whole thing. Does it exist? Well, not until you open up the box. So there is something from that side of physics and I'm going to screw this up, but it's not really God, why am I having a hard time? I'm thinking of like and see, I've got his book around here someplace, but I'm trying to think of like individuals who want to sit and talk about philosophy, but they take it from a metaphysical or a physical or a physics type of perspective. I'm going to come up with a name in a second, but it's one of the, when you sit and think about action, reaction, well, what would have happened if you didn't observe it? It's the same kind of concept right here. And I think that's really, to me, that's really fascinating, especially as it pertains to this whole conversation. Well, if you watch it, how does it influence you? And if you don't watch it, does it influence you at all? But if it's influencing people around you, then by default, isn't it still influencing to some extent? Anybody?
Yep. So we've
well
had about this too, to the point to where, okay, well, simply because something seemingly doesn't exist, does it mean that it actually doesn't exist? Like it's along that same line. It's like we've talked about this as it pertains to UFOs and cryptids. Like, well, just because I haven't seen it doesn't substantiate the claim at all that it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
But it also doesn't substantiate the claim that it does exist. So it's one of those things, again, like that Schrodinger's cat. It's like I hate to even segue into this, but there's also something like Schrodinger's gun. How can you say it does this, but then you also say in like terms that it can't do this? So it's.
But I think so. I love how you just did it with Schrodinger's gun, because to bring it back to you guys and bring it back to video games and predictive patterning.
Schrodinger's gun.
Seriously, but that's kind of a funny thing. But going back to what you guys saying, if you are seeing the patterns, then you want to play the game because you want to open up the lid and see what's inside the box. I mean,
true.
Steven?
Yeah, true. No, it's right. I'm just agreeing with you. That's right on.
Well, I'm hoping you can add a little bit more, flavorful commentary and maybe a little bit more intelligence other than what we were just doing. So, hey, come on.
Well,
we're just look here. I'm going to bring it back to different view. Here's the reality. I kind of like your beard. You have a piratey look, and you got the black beard. But at the end of the day, we're just the knuckleheads pressing buttons. You are the informed, the guest, the thing that's going to make people listen. So I don't want you to just agree. Shed a little bit more of wisdom on us, sir.
Well, I think that it's important to consider too the power of story. I think story is actually what gives life meaning, and that's why religions, have their holy texts, and they tell you a story, and it's the story of humanity and his relationship to the divine, and it usually comes with things like that you don't expect. And I think irony and conflict are the heart of all storytelling. And we reached an age of technological development.
And I would just quickly, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think redemption is another one of our big story arcs that we use in a lot of everything, literature, movies, everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. I would agree.
Redemption. Yeah. So I agree with what you just said about that, like what we use as stories, but I think redemption is another huge one for us as humans.
Mm-hmm.
So we think in stories, we think of ourselves as the protagonist of our own life. And the conflicts that come are the adventures that we experience. And, the death of our body is the death of the story for us. Life goes on. But so if you think about it, the implementation in story of story into something like a simulated world, which we call a video game, is actually pretty revolutionary.
Yeah.
Well, again, but so bringing it back here, but is that just because we're in this position, technologically speaking, that where we can, video games are a reality, whereas again, 50 years ago, that wasn't really a reality, right? So we looked to other mediums to do what you just said, Stephen, to find a way to tell a story, to do a redemption tale or again, whatever because again, you just think about it, there's really only a handful of real topics that really get everybody's look at just, okay, here, I'll take it back into movies, right? Modern movies. It's I hate to say it, it's kind of a cookie cutter mathematical equation. You want to make a good movie? Well, okay, what is your movie about? Is it going to be about space? Is it going to be about a mystery? Is it going to be about whatever that subject or that theme is?
What's your trope?
Yeah. And then, so once you identify that, there is a mathematical formula that's going to result in, well, unless you do something really stupid and hire the wrong actor or actress or they just, they're horrible at their job. But if you follow that mathematical formula, even though, and because we've already kind of talked about this, there's movies that we all know are cheesy, but we all still like.
Oh, 100%.
Well, why is that? Because it was solid math.
Yep.
And it hit us where it needed to hit us.
Yep.
And that kind of goes back to Stephen's point, so again, is this nothing more than, predictive programming? And I'm kind of ending it on the movie side. You guys were talking about videos, but I think videos are just our modern version of what would have been a good black and white film noir movie or a good novel, a good book, back in the 50s and 60s and type of time frame. So
well, and I guess I'll kind of provide my ending thoughts, because I can work into that really well, whether it's video games or movies, or even if it's you don't hear spoken stories anymore, which is, I think, are probably the most powerful form of getting a story. But where I'm going to go with this, essentially, because I do like this as kind of like a nice wrap up, if you will, for this, is when you look at stories. And I think this may answer part of the question of why there's so much media about, ancient cultures such as like the Romans or the Vikings or whatever, is because they put so much value into their stories, even if some of their stories are just utter BS, right? Like, the thing of it is there was so much implicit emotion and meaning in it. And what you saw in these stories, especially ones that were, whether they were real or fake, is it showed that even the little guy was just as capable of doing great and amazing things as the Roman senator who aspired to be, like Caesar. But it also had tales of virtue. It had tales of courage. It had, there was depth to it. And I guess what I'm saying is they were inspired back then. If you look at our art in general, as it pertains to media, I think by design, they have made so many forms of media so uninspired, because they don't want the little person to have hope. They want you to feel exactly how they perceive you, which is small. And it's antithetical to the human condition to just remain small. But yet they do such a great way of diminishing your humanity that, and they can do it right through media. Nope, this is another run-of-the-mill, we're going to put the same 5 actors in this movie. It's like Liam Neeson is a great thing. He literally reprises his role in the same movie with a different title. And that's the thing, is what movie has he done in the last 10 or 15 years that has not been the same thing?
So my response to that, though, before we come over, not to pick on Liam Neeson, but before we come over to Blackbeard for his comments, I actually agree with a lot you said, and I disagree with 1 or 2 points. Which is, you look at ancient cultures in society. So again, we're using video games, but we see this now in our culture of video games, where we see more of the small guy can do as much as the king. Now, Shakespeare did some of that kind of stuff in his play. So I guess now, in all fairness, we have seen that. I take that back. I was going to say that really wasn't promoted. So maybe maybe if you go back into ancient Norse and Roman, but then again, I'm not a PhD level student of Roman society. Maybe they had their stories like that as well, but we don't know of them now, right? We know of some of them because there is some historical reality, again, like we just talked about, such as Spartacus, right?
Yeah.
Or, we do know in Norse mythology, like there were cast outs characters that fought the gods or became gods and did great things. So I think you're right on that, but I think, maybe, when you get into like, I don't know if you're going to call it the more modern era, that's when we start seeing more of those stories take place within the grander literature community. Again, think about Shakespeare. I mean, like hardly any of Shakespeare's, works don't involve some aspect of the little guy can achieve and the big guy isn't always right. However you want to phrase it in
that dynamic.
Yeah, that's some dynamic like that. Blackbeard, bringing that over to you. I don't know if you want to follow that vein or if you want to go back into the original vein, which is, again, we're talking, it started with games, but medium, where we're kind of ending it with all forms of entertainment. And at the end of the day, I think it's the predictive patterning. It's the shaping the battlefield so people do what we want them to do, whoever the we are, right?
The majority of games aren't AAA titles. They take a long time to develop and they're very expensive. So those are the ones that seem to have the best storylines that I think can act in a way that's closer to the predictive programming like you would see in a film. But there are also the video games that are literal, dopamine machine gaming, like you said, gaming, grooming, addictive things. And that is to siphon people's attention, because in the age of information, it's your focus that has the value. They want your focus away from things that are pertinent to your life. They want it on things that are irrelevant. They want you constantly distracted, and they want your money.
Yep.
I just we can't go down this rabbit hole, but I'm so happy you just said that, because something that I hadn't thought about this whole conversation until Steven just said it. But think about social media. It's what you just said. Again, that's another perfect soundbite.
Yeah.
Dopamine hits, get you distracted, focused on things that don't matter.
Yeah.
How many man on the street interviews have we seen where somebody ask a question like, hey, who fought in the American Civil War? And then people say weird things. And then they say, well, who's on the Kardashians? And they know all the names of the Kardashians. What you just said, Blackbeard, that's where my brain went, is look at how more and more people are falling victim to that. I know all the Kardashians, but I don't even know when the War of 1812 started. That was a joke, right? But that's it. Like, hey, when was the War of 1812? Was that like 1740? You're missing the point. I just,
And to your point, like, just to segue quickly into video games, like, and Stephen will probably know exactly what I'm talking about. You have people, as it relates to Elder Scrolls, which is the Skyrim, Skyrim's one of the games.
Okay.
But it's like, you could go and ask somebody, because most people have played some Bethesda game. You could be like, oh, like what like lore do you know of, the world of Tamriel? And Tamriel is the greater, one of the greater worlds of Elder Scrolls. And it's like, they'll tell you everything about it. Okay, well, like, what do you know about, like, the
Revolutionary
War, or like the French Revolution,
World War II,
right? It's like, oh, I don't know. So, but it plays to that point of like, there is.
So that goes to Steve's point. If I'm interpreting you correctly, we've been so dumbed down and watered down, and our focus, we've been misdirected. We focus on these other things that have no bearing, right?
Yep.
But back into the predictive programming and getting everybody to think. I know everything about the Kardashians or Skyrim, but I don't know anything about even my society. I don't even know who my fucking neighbors are, for that matter, right?
Right.
Is that kind of what you guys are saying?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, Steven, on that note, I think we're going to wrap it up a little bit early. I know you got to bounce anyway, but might be the first ever under 2-hour podcast.
I know.
If we don't start babbling.
First in a long time.
Yeah. But Steven, as always, thank you so very much.
Yeah,
and I'm just here to tell everybody we haven't even done justice to the handful of conversations I've been privy to that, about the subject with you guys. But Stephen, give us your final comments, sir. Because there's so much more. I mean, I don't know if we can do this even in 2 hours.
I would just say that I don't think that video games are inherently bad. I haven't made up my mind yet whether technology can be inherently bad. I've read some things to that end, but I just haven't made my mind up on it. But I still like them. I still enjoy them. This isn't like for me about bashing them or making anybody afraid or anything like that. But, just I think the lessons that you would take from it are be intentional with your time and what you give your focus to. And certainly if you're responsible for any children or young people, beyond that, even more, because they're far more susceptible to these things that are going on than we are. And we have a responsibility to the future generations. We're not taking care of the young generation well enough, I don't think. But
I think that was really well said. And just to echo one of those last little comments, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the video game. Just like anything, it can develop and it can develop and promote skills that are worthy, like hand-eye coordination, decision making, problem solving. I think the games that I play, I like them because they're more problem solving first player games. I don't like the shoot 'em games, people like, start doing Call of Duty and we can play, even though I'm like, that's not my thing, baby. It's just not my thing. There's no mystery. There's no something that's going to challenge my brain or get me to think through and problem solve.
I recommend Portal 1 and Portal 2.
Portal's fun. Yeah.
Which one is that?
So that was Portal was that was Valve Studios, wasn't it? Yeah. So Valve Studios. All I could go on. I'm not going to do it, but there's I'm just going to say that.
Okay, but without getting weird, but so I don't think this is the same game, but I played a game about 2 years ago and it was very generic. It was 2-dimensional and it was like, an old school computer, like our stand-up games where your character's just running and it's always, left to right, up, down, but on the screen. But you had to problem solve things. Do I duck here? Do I jump on that? Can I move this? And it was all about
it's very much along the lines of kind of like that. I would say that it gives you, well, without spoiling it, like there's this idea that you have more control than you actually do. And it's similar to the idea of like the Stanley Parable, which I'm sure you know about, Stephen, which is I believe is that not, if I remember right, that's somewhat related to like the Portal-esque universe, the Stanley Parable in some way, but it gives you this idea that you're more in control than what you really are.
So you're a child. There's been some type of act. You don't even really know what the backdrop is, but you're a kid trying to stay alive in this evil and everything's dark and foggy. And, you're trying to, there's guys with guns and you're trying to avoid them. And, you're trying to get your way through this maze, of both an external environment and, inside of a building type of environment. So that's not the same game. But I'm going to look that one up because again, to Stephen's point, my final comment on that, we'll turn it back over to Stephen, but there's nothing wrong with video games. Hand-eye acuity, reflexes, your thought process, decision-making process, problem-solving skills. I think there can be something there. But at the end of the day, I have played some of the games you've talked about, and I think I'm warming up more and more to maybe there is, and honestly, maybe it is that we're all just in a simulation, and
we could all be insane too.
Yeah, well, we could. Yeah, well, there's that as well. Exactly. Stephen, final comments on your side, sir.
Go find a good video game and give it a go.
Yeah.
That's your final comment?
Like that.
That's it. That's all I got for you.
Oh, that's pretty good. All right. Well, hey, seriously, as always, thank you so very much for taking the time out of your busy life to join us. Just so, and I know we didn't, and I apologize, guys. I know we didn't get anywhere near to some of the things that we wanted to talk about, but it was still a great time. Thank you for actually taking the time to be right here. And Steven, thank you for taking the time out of your busy life to be right there, on the screen with us. Yeah. And we always appreciate having you on. So very much thank you. And thanks to everybody who is watching and listening, taking the time out of your lives. I do have to give a quick shout out to, and I'm going to screw up his name. I got it written down. It's right over here. Where's that piece of paper right there? Let me see it. Anthony from New York City. Anthony B from New York City. Apparently, Anthony B has watched every episode. He's a customer of mine over at Centerline Systems.
Way to go, Anthony.
Yeah, he reached out the other day with some comments. And, dude, we're taking them to heart. He had some great comments and some people we should look into from the UFO side of things that have more of a theological or a religious perspective on UFOs. And so, Anthony B from New York City, thank you, sir.
Thanks, buddy.
Said I'd give you a shout out, and I meant it. Woo! All right, Steven, last words, anything?
I just think that it's going to be interesting to see whether the things that we discussed are going to play out in the future, and if there'll be people in podcasts looking back and being like, could you believe in 2023 that game was saying, XYZ, and now it's, it'll just be interesting to see, because that'd just be confirmation, but hopefully it'll be a wonderful thing, because the same tools that they use to what we think of in a very dark or malevolent, from that perspective, as manipulative or controlling, or they want to do these things. And I do think that element is in there, and that's what I would, put forward. But, is there any reason that it couldn't be used with a greater awareness to make a better world? Yeah. Yes. I don't see any reason that it couldn't. So. Yes.
But I think that right there, boys, I mean, I think that just describes the whole, life's, perpetual battle between good and evil. I mean, there's two sides to every coin. I mean, video games aren't bad. They could be used for good. This whole conversation and predictive programming, all that stuff, there are ways in which this can be used for good, unfortunately. And so just even on that note, we didn't even scratch the surface of how much, in my opinion, you guys kind of woken me up to this a little bit. There's a huge correlation between this type of media and evil, and how it's being used to coerce and cajole and control people. And that I'm not done with that shit. Yeah. I don't like that at all. So
and I guess the only thing I have to really say is, one, I agree with both of you guys. I don't see video games necessarily as being like a construct of anything negative. I do agree in the fact that, yes, you can put out negative things via media, video games especially. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's, and this is a conversation we'll have down the road, but I wouldn't say that it's behind most of the violence issues that we have today. And that, I mean, does it mean that it couldn't some way, maybe you could, but there again, I have my
but that's why they want to ban Catcher in the Rye, because they blame Catcher in the Rye for violence. And
so that being said, there was a discussion we just had the other day that I think kind of blew your mind to a certain degree when I told you about my own experience, and we're gonna have a conversation about that. But as far as video games, I agree too that it's a great mechanism or a tool to be able to teach you how to do things. There's people. Real briefly, there's a game series called Arma, and more people have learned how to use navigational maps. They have the terrain features, topographics. They've learned how to communicate. They've learned how to There's people that actually take what they learn in there, and then they'll run it, because a lot of the guys that go on there are either prior service or people that are really into guns. So they'll get out there and they'll learn how to run different drills just in maneuvers, because everything you do in there, if your team is not the one that's communicating, you're behind. So it's it's an invaluable tool to learn how to communicate and work together with people. And it's just one of many iterations. But yeah, no, I agree. You can learn a lot of different things from different games, but I also yield to the idea into the thought that Stephen brought up too, which is if you have kids, if you have a family, if you have things, you need to figure out your priorities. But you also need to be cognizant that if your kids are going to play a certain game, it might not be a bad idea to figure out what's in that game first. You know, I mean, a little bit of prudence goes a long way.
Yeah.
So, and I'm just going to leave it at that because there's way more to be said. But
all right, Blackbeard, I'm going to turn over here for one. We already said final comments, but one last final comment. But please, just a reminder, do send me an email. Send me that link for that Chris Knowles blog so I can put that into the video here tonight. All right, your final comments, sir, and then whatever you say, then we'll come over to you for the outro.
Perfect.
If you really like games that are story based, because I like to, like, I used to play first person shooters too. Like, I like a wide breadth of it, but a really interesting one that I thought was a game called What Remains of Edith Finch. It was made by a little independent studio, I think, but the whole thing is just like you going through this house and simultaneously the life of this like young girl that shows like the entire history of this family, and it's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
I like that kind of stuff. So again, just going back into it, video games, just like anything else, they can be good. They can be used for good, and they can stimulate and compel and promote, and there's all kinds of things. But I think, just to wrap it up from my humble perspective, what my real takeaway from your guys' conversation, and maybe I kind of screwed that up a little bit tonight, and I didn't give you guys a chance to really quite say it the same way, but there is something potentially sinister. There's something else maybe going on here, right? There might just be a little, whether that's the tail wagging the dog, maybe it's Easter eggs, maybe it's, people finding, alternative medias and opportunities to drop signs, all the way to, what Blackbeard's saying about, like, can you even read the signs? Not everybody can, like, dude, it's easier in the wintertime. Yeah, a deer just walked through here. Can you see that through the, maybe you can't see that sign.
It's like virtual sport.
Exactly.
Which that was kind of a technical term if you're getting more into the tracking community, but
but it's the same kind of point. It's the same concept. So, all right, Blackbeard, thank you again.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
Final comment. Something pithy. Maybe about your beard. Something about your beard.
I think it's important in the age of declining masculinity to grow a beard so that you can show the world that you still have secondary sex characteristics of a masculine nature.
Did you just see what we did? Did you? I don't know if you did that intentionally, but you did this little profile view.
You were doing the stoic pose.
It was awesome. It was awesome.
Beard's the line. I'll give one last plug
I'll give one last plug where I think entertainment can be good. Finally, a streaming service show that I actually thought was really good was One Piece. It had a great fucking story, and it was all about camaraderie and doing the right thing and not being afraid and facing your fears and it's based on anime, but the live action, honestly, it was nice to see a movie that wasn't trying to jam bullshit down my throat anymore. Well, it's not a movie, a series, but I'll throw that out there. Just my last plug.
So I guess just to kind of wrap it up, I think masculinity is something we are kind of in short stock of, but that being said, I also think that proper femininity is also like it's a yin and yang to where there is a lack of.
Cheers to you. No, you're
where there is. I do believe in the decline of men. There has also been a decline of women, and that has never been more present than today. For all the things that men have to contend with. I feel like women are getting railroaded almost worse than we are.
Oh, I don't know if we want to open this up because I'm just gonna jump in there. Where are all the feminists? Where are all the feminists? I used to love and support you guys, dude. What the hell is happening to women in the?
So like I think that if we can have media that to some degree can bring that back, and I do think that that's why there is a larger call to the times of yester century, because it's not yesteryear, but yester centuries. Because there's this idea of it, you know, it's not the woman in the kitchen thing. It's what it is there are roles that both men and women fulfill very well. And we need each other to be able to adequately fulfill those roles. And I think media
just to slow you down, but just to wrap it up and bring it into video games. But here's the deal. Women weren't fighting on the front lines in World War II. So stop interjecting that kind of bullshit into video games, right? Like, you know, like, come on, man. You can always make a video game where if a female wants to, or if somebody wants to play a female character, but don't try to, like, you know, to going all the way back to where we were going at the beginning of this. Don't try to change the narrative or the conversation or the history using this media. So you have a group of people who grow up thinking that women were on, you know, storming Normandy Beach. I mean, you're like, no, come on, man. You know, or the beaches of Normandy, excuse me, to be more specific.
You know, the thing of it is even in those examples to where there were women in positions of like sharpshooters or anything like that. And I mean, they were outliers. Like they were just exceptional at what they did, and that's why they got to where they were. So, and
there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
No, but I digress. We're going to get too far afield here. On that note, everybody.
See, we already digressed by 10 minutes.
On that note,
10 minutes. Take us out.
We do appreciate everything that you guys have done in terms of support. We appreciate you turning out to watch these videos. Stephen, as always, as with all of our guests, we greatly appreciate you taking time out of your day. Mark, thank you for taking the time out of your days to help make this a thing, you know. And
thanks for being a knucklehead enough to drive up here and be in the same room with me.
I know. So and on that note, everybody, our gratitude is endless. And you know, the flame of liberty shall not and will not be extinguished so long as there are good people willing to defend and support it. And as Mark always says, look, you are the resistance. That means that you have to get into the fight. You have to be willing to fulfill that duty to defend liberty and defend your people, because in the end of the day, look, like it takes all of us. So
it does.
And on that note, I'm ending it on that. So Mark, take us out.
Well, you just took us out. Hey, everybody. Thanks again. Thanks to Stephen. Thanks to Redbeard for driving over here to be in the studio tonight. And thank you for taking the time to watch and listen to this video. And we'll see you next week, where I think we're going to do Guns and Things Part 2. Yeah, that's it. All right, everybody.
All right. Cheers.
Woo!